So now, if we had our generation inspiring teachers like Professor Gunasekara and constant interaction, even if we were not in the same faculty, what is the predicament of those who have had suffered huge learning loss and related issues caused by the pandemic and the economic crisis? They don't even have access to teachers, much less inspiring ones, and that situation. How, and this of course, as you know, is exacerbated by inappropriate and improper policies at the school and the university level. How can you remedy that as a concrete issue that we have now? We have now to be able to make up for these 3 years.
I think the biggest issue is in terms of policies and opening the eyes of the policymakers is that they never recognized that there was an issue connected to learning. They didn't recognize it. Schools shut in March 2020, so did universities. It happened in 195 countries. 1.8 billion kids were thrown out of school overnight. But the more enlightened education systems and ministers and governments in the world woke up to this issue very quickly. Even in the well-developed countries like in Northern Europe, in Northern America, Canada and Australia, even in countries like that, which had avenues for kids to transit very seamlessly, like I said, to online learning, they knew that there is going to be a deficit in learning. Because after all, face-to-face, in-person learning in class is the method to impart education. Everything else is second. But what happened in Sri Lanka was that it's still there. It's not happened, it is still happening. The policymakers never thought it's an issue. They never thought we should now pay heed to these learning losses. And like I said, less than 50% of children had access to some form of education, even through a simple smartphone, let alone a laptop or a tab or a PC. They chose to ignore it. They didn't want to assess learning losses. Meanwhile, our peers across the world, what were they doing? They were developing diagnostic tests, they developed academic recovery task forces in countries. They quickly learned to diagnose the learning losses. So learning losses quickly came into the vocabulary of education like jargon in the UNESCO and similar circles. And what did they say? They found within the first 6 months, even in the affluent countries, learning losses were well into 30%, 40%. And a learning loss is defined as the amount of learning you would lose if you don't have that learning in the class face-to-face with the teacher. In the case of South Asia, in the case of the African continent and the other underdeveloped countries, it went as high as 60%. So what are the remedial measures that the other countries took? They really rolled out very, very swift plans. Like even countries like Rwanda, Vietnam, Cambodia, they rolled out plans very quickly. The government obviously stepped in, they furnished the kids in the particularly in the rural and the underdeveloped parts of their relevant countries with laptops and PCs, just so that they can access some education. Worked with UNESCO and UN agencies like the ITU and got satellite connections and so on, lots of stuff, but we didn't. We chose to ignore learning losses. We chose to understand that there is a pandemic-induced learning loss which is going to transfer into an earning loss. The child who was in grade 3 in March 2020, when schools opened in November 2021, had to go back, should have been in the same class because he had actually lost learning, but went into grade 5 with a huge gap in learning. So those were the main issues, and I know in the university sector, large swaths of students were left without because they didn't have access to the internet or to devices. So what is concerning, what is worrying even now is we don't have a national assessment on learning losses even now. As of today, the United States of America, in certain states, they are still calculating their learning losses. They are still training their teachers to catch-up learning because they have understood the gravity of it, but we haven't. We have not trained our teachers in catch-up learning, diagnosing the learning losses, implementing catch-up learning. So there are huge gaps, and the fact is, the saddest thing is that the policymakers of the government won't realize that we are going to face this repercussion much later. I call it the long COVID of education. They're not going to realize this. They are going to have a set of undereducated, poorly skilled, a sad set of children, young people who are going to enter society which is anyway threatened by the multiple challenges that we are having now. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but basically that is the issue we are still grappling with, while other countries are slowly crawling their way out of the problem.